So a little bit of a brief introduction about me, for those of you who have not met me. My name is Ben Dechrai. I'm a developer advocate for Sonar. So if you've ever used SonarLint, SonarCube, any of those products for clean code, that's who I work for. This has got nothing to do with that at all. We won't even be using their products while writing code. Maybe we should. I don't know. But the outcome, what we want to be able to build at the end of this is a secure end-to-end encrypted messenger. It's going to be fairly rudimentary. I would suggest that maybe it would almost be production ready in terms of security, but we'll go through some of the security concerns that you might face when building something like this. Like I've mentioned to a couple of you, there are no minimum requirements for your level of technology. As long as you know how to code and ideally have some knowledge of JavaScript or a C style language, you'll be fine. We'll be going to be using React. As you can see up here, we're going to be using React Visual Studio Code. We're actually going to do it in the cloud using Gitpod. So we're not going to be touching your local development environments. You're not going to break something when you get back to work next week. Suddenly you can't compile things because I've broken your laptop. So you don't have to worry about that. I've put Netlify up there. We're not actually going to be pushing anything into Netlify. You could if you wanted to. But Netlify have an awesome command line tool which allows you to run cloud functions in your local environment without having to push them into the cloud. So that's really useful. Supabase for storing data in, and Auth0 for user identity management. And those are all the things we're going to touch today. So you don't need to have done any prep work. We will take it step by step. This workshop usually takes about 2.5 to 3 hours. Second slide, which basically has the URL that this QR code goes to. So if you want to head to that URL, that is going to be the source of the workshop. There's a whole lot of README files there. I'll be stepping you through each phase of that live, doing some live demoing up here. You can follow along, or you can just watch and then follow along in the gap. There'll be time in between, and I'll be wandering around to help you if you get stuck. The idea here is that technically you could, and if you want to, you could just step ahead and do this workshop by yourself today and just ignore me, because the notes should be good enough, but I want to be here to support you to get that working, and also interrupt every now and then just to talk about some of the security decisions that have been made and how public-private key encryption works, for example, if you're not familiar with that. So does anybody not have, let me see, not have this up on their screen yet? That's the URL you just went to. Everybody found the GitHub page? Cool. Does everybody here have a GitHub account? I'm assuming, does anybody here not have a GitHub account? Let's put it that way. Okay, same hands up. I'm going to assume you've all got a GitHub account. So let's get started. We've got some prerequisites here. We've got some keys. So as you're going through the documentation, if you see anything that's got like the finger pointy icon, that's basically an action to take. So if you wanted to, you could go through this workshop and only look for those icons and just do each of those steps, and you should get this working. Then there's some explanatory stuff and some pictures in there to help you make sure you're at the right position. We've got some checkpoints where you can do stuff to make sure you're on the right track, some tips that'll help you out every now and then. And then we've got a lookout exclamation mark. I love how that one's like old school ASCII icon instead of an actual emoji. But there'll be some lookout gotcha kind of informational bits in there as well. So let's go straight into the pre-workshop setup. So the first 10-15 minutes will be that today. So we need to sign up for some accounts. Presumably you've all got a GitHub account already. If you don't have an Auth0 account, head there to set up a free Auth0 account, and then also set yourself up a free Supabase account. And I will give you all some time to do that. If you get stuck at all, just raise your hands, or just shout at me. That works too. Do we have people following along at home as well? On the live stream? Is this one being streamed, or is it only being recorded? How do I find out if anybody at home has questions? Okay. To those of you listening at home, thank you for coming. I don't know how much I'm going to be able to help you, but hopefully the process will be slow enough and paced well enough that you'll be able to follow. If not, do I have my Twitter handle anyway? I don't, but my Twitter handle is basically Ben Dechrai without the space. I know it goes by a different name now, but I refuse to use that name. The product, not my name. My DMs are open on Twitter, so you can send me a message if you have any questions. I won't be able to answer them during this 3-hour period, but send me a message and I can help you out after the fact. All right, so setting up an Auth0 account is probably a couple of minutes. Hopefully you've gotten that one done. Anybody having problems with Auth0 at the moment? Yep. If you go to pre-workshop setup, and then scroll down a little bit, so you've got your GitHub account already, then you've got a free Auth0 account and a free Supabase account. Come on in. Do you want to do a workshop? No, he doesn't. Okay, that's fine. Everybody okay on creating these accounts? Something's wrong? Oh, have you broken Auth0? How did you get to that?
I just tried to GitHub.
I usually just create an account with an email address and password, so I'm not sure why they're having this issue. Maybe try a different authentication mechanism. Weird. How about if you just go to auth0.com and we'll start as though you hadn't followed on my links. Yep. And then sign up from there. Let's see if something's broken. Yeah. Hopefully that one works. All right. Does anybody, you're still doing the Auth0 and Supabase. Anybody else need help setting up those two accounts? So next thing we're going to do, and I'll take it slow, so you've still got time. Don't worry about it too much. Are you okay on both of them? Sweet. All right, scroll to the bottom of that page and we'll go to step 1. This is where we actually start doing some of the more exciting stuff. Signing up for accounts is boring. If you click on this link here, this will launch in Gitpod. Has anybody here used Gitpod before? Good, because Gitpod will give you a free number of hours per month that you can use their services. And if you're already using it, then this would chew into that. But luckily none of you do, therefore that's not an issue. So if you click on this link, it'll take you to a page. Looks a little bit like this. There might be a couple of questions before this because you'll be creating a new account, but eventually it's going to take you to this saying we want to create a new workspace. And this is basically going to take all of the code in that repository and start an in-cloud VS Code editor and development environment. So we'll be able to code all together in the same space. So let me know when you've gotten to this screen, or in fact when you get to this screen, just hit continue and you'll be presented with eventually a code editor. And then we'll all feel a bit more comfortable. Good, good. You're lagging? That's all right. Don't worry, I'm here.
Websites because it's a business.
That's annoying. So if you, we're now on step 1, so if you click on that one there. You got the Auth0 account as well? Okay. And then if you click on launch this workshop in Gitpod, that'll open. I've just noticed when you click on that link, it actually doesn't open in another tab. So if you didn't open in a new tab, it I usually just go with the defaults. Okay, that's gone to new. If you go back to the workshop notes, there was a, and you go to setting up your new development environment. There's a link there. Launch this workshop in Gitpod, and that'll actually pass in all the parameters to start it up. Okay. Hey, how you doing? You doing the workshop? Sure. I'll get you up to speed very quickly. So, let me just... So you go to that URL. You have a Gitpod account, GitHub account already?
Yeah.
Sweet. You have to ask sometimes, you never know. So if you go to that, that's what the README MD is basically all the notes. And you'll notice there's a table of contents. So the first step, step 0, is to create an Auth0 account and a Supabase account. So you can do that. And then step 2, or step 1, is to launch everything in Gitpod, which is a hosted environment editor in the cloud that we're using. And you should get to the screen that I'm about to show. If you need any help, just stick your hand up and I'll come over. How did it go? All right, still answering personal questions. The setup process is always the most boring, but we'll get there soon. We'll have some fun in a minute. Does anybody else need help? Bless you. Does anybody else need help getting into Gitpod? Do you see... So you should see this file structure on the left there, once you've opened Gitpod. That's all right. So if you go to that URL, that'll take you to the GitHub repository for the workshop. There's a whole load of steps in there. Start with step 0, which is setting up an Auth0 account and a Supabase account. Step 1 is launching the workshop in Gitpod, which is a VS Code in the cloud environment, and that's where we're up to at the moment. Just takes a couple of steps. How's it going? Oh, you're in? Does anybody not see, not this one, does anybody not see Gitpod, other than those who've just arrived? Does anybody not see Gitpod with this file structure? Does anybody need help getting to that point?
So we need to create the workspace, right?
So if you go back to the instructions, and you go to setting up your development environment, number 1, there's a link there which will launch the workshop in Gitpod, and that passes all the environment information through, and then you can just hit continue and you'll get to that. There'll be a couple of questions maybe, but you've probably done that already. All right. So for those of you, as I mentioned, for those of you who just clicked on the link to open in Gitpod, it actually didn't open in a new tab. So you'll have to go back to the GitHub notes in another tab. I don't know why GitHub didn't open in a new tab. It does on my machine, but I'm not going to ship my machine, so you know. Cool. So I'm assuming you're all at this point here, where you can see VS Code. Now there might be a question. Mine's disappeared down at the bottom there that says, would you like to open this in VS Code on your laptop? You can actually do that if you want, but I know that I can support you if you stay in this version. If you don't, there might be extra little things you need to set up in terms of your local laptop communicating with Gitpod and that kind of thing. So try and stay in the Gitpod environment, and then that way we're all in the same playing field and makes me easier to support if something goes wrong. So this is the fun part now. This is where we basically all start working together and copying and pasting. So first thing we want to do is install the Netlify CLI. So out of interest, hands up if you consider yourself familiar enough with JavaScript. Comfortable with JavaScript. Awesome. React? Sweet. Most of you. If you haven't done React before, that's absolutely fine. But even most JavaScript project nowadays, you'll be familiar with NPM and NPM run dev or start dev. Netlify dev is exactly the same, but on top of that, it also adds its own extra service. So it'll start your application on port 3000, which is standard for NPM, but it'll then run your application also on port 8888, and it gives you the facility to run or to write Netlify functions, which are hosted cloud Lambda type functions that Netlify will host for you. But using the Netlify command line tools means that when we run that, those functions are actually running in your local development environment. We don't actually need to push anything into the cloud. I mean, technically, Gitpod is in the cloud. But if you were doing it locally on your machine, then it would all be running locally on your machine, and it's a really good way to do front-end and back-end application development under one space without having to run multiple services and that kind of thing. So that's why we're using Netlify CLI. There's no real reason you would use this. You would have to use this. You could do it if you're hosting on Vercel or AWS or anywhere else. This is just really good for this workshop. So on the right-hand side, there's a convenient copy button. So if we copy that, come back over into our application, into our Gitpod environment, and paste that in here. We'll get that going in the background. And then we'll move on to step 2 in the notes. This is where we test the conference internet. All right, I'm done. Anybody else done yet? One person. If I had chocolates, you'd be a winner. I didn't bring any chocolates with me. I can offer you a glass of water. It's half drunk, though. I don't think you want it. All right, we good to go? Sweet. Next step. So we should now be on step 2, installing dependencies. So you'll see there's a start directory there already. So in your editor over here, let's just change into that start directory. And then we're going to run npm install. Make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself. Npm install npm I is going to pull out all the dependencies that are already part of this application. So we're starting from a baseline. We're going to start with the chat app that exists, but it's not encrypted. And we're going to be adding the encryption on top of that. And then once that's done, you can run, I'm just checking I can even type properly. You can run Netlify dev. And you'll see that it does the normal familiar kind of npm start stuff going on here. And you'll see that there's a service now running on port 3000. And in a second, we'll also get another pop-up telling us there's a service running on port 8888. There we go. So that's the Netlify version. That's the npm version. So Netlify is basically proxying through to npm and then adding its own function capabilities on top. So we're only going to be looking at port 8888 during this workshop. Say again?
I got a nice stack trace.
Did you?
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Well, there's no way. There was a stack
Oh, yeah, that's fine. You're a step ahead. So now, when you open this, and you can just click on the localhost 8888, it'll convert that automatically into the URL for your Gitpod instance. So I'm going to open this in, I'm going to command click to open it in a new tab. Come on. And you should see something like this. That's correct. If you got this and you're like, oh shit, I got something wrong, you haven't. It's absolutely fine. I know, see what your hand up. Was that because you got this message or you need a different, you're good? Excellent. The reason why you got this message is because we haven't configured Supabase yet. So it's trying to connect to Supabase to pull out messages, but it can't. And that's fine because we still need to do that connection. Yes. If you go back to the instructions, did you, on the previous page, at the bottom of this page here, did you run that one? This is now all on the cloud, so hopefully you should be able to. Cool. All right.
Maybe somebody else is struggling with Gitpod and user verification using the phone number? Or is it just me? Because it asks for the number and whatever I gave.
Phone call user validation required. I wonder why. This is required to discourage and reduce abuse on. I wonder whether they've picked up the fact that a whole lot of people are creating Gitpod accounts from the same IP address, and they've locked you down.
I should be using that.
Maybe, although now your account's been flagged already. So you might need to create a second account. I'm afraid I can't help with that one. If you get it working, catch up. If not, just keep watching and enjoy the show. Enjoy me messing up. All right, let's continue. So we've installed the dependencies. We've started Netlify dev. We've gotten that error message, right? Because we haven't actually connected to Supabase yet. One thing I want to do before we go any further is if you come down to the ports tab at the bottom here, you'll see the 300888 ports that we're running. And currently, both of these have got a padlock on them, which means that they are only accessible by you in this browser. It uses a session-based identifier to make sure that only you can access it, which is like it's a development environment. You don't want it to be public. But because we're going to be using authentication, the way that the OpenID Connect, what's the word I'm looking for? OAuth 2.0 authentication flow works is it has a callback and it needs to be able to access your application. So for port 8888 on this padlock here, if you just click on that padlock, it'll turn into an open padlock at some point. Do it. Doesn't like me. Is it working for everybody? It's working? It should over here say public when that works. Let me just refresh this. As long as I'm the one having issues, I'm okay. If you're having issues, then... All right, the other thing I can do is over here is make port 888 public that way. So now hopefully when I come back over here, the way you can test this is if you click on the port 8888, it'll open this up, and then I can open a different browser. And if I can access, excellent. So that's now working across a different browser that I'm not logged into with Gitpod, so I know that it's accessible publicly. That's cool. All right, let's continue. So we've set that up. That's going to allow Auth0 to be able to basically communicate with the application, or rather our application to communicate with Auth0 for authentication side of things. Next thing we need to do is create an Auth0 application. So you can either click on this link here. Again, I would recommend doing an open in new tab because I don't know that it's not going to take you away from the notes completely. And once that's loaded, you should see a list of applications in your current tenant. Now, I'm going to create a new tenant just for this workshop. What's the date today? The 16th. Just so I've got a clean environment like you're probably looking at. You don't need to do that part. But you should come to Applications, Applications. You should see this page here once you've followed that link. You can see that? Cool. So head over to Create New Application. Give it a name. I'm going to call it my Secure Messenger. And we want to select Single Page Web Application. The reason why we have to define the kind of application here is because OAuth works differently if you're doing a server-to-server authentication, where there's a level of trust, versus a single-page application where the browser is part of that authentication flow and the browser is an untrusted environment. And then you've got regular web apps like sit on your desktop and machine-to-machine where servers just talk to each other. But in our case, we're writing a single-page web application. It's a React app. Even though there are some server components in the cloud, the React app is the hub of where we decide whether or not a user is logged in. And then we click on Create. And there's a quick start page that'll help you integrate if you want to, but we're just going to jump straight over to the Settings tab for the next part of this. I've got a lot of tabs open up here that I don't need. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is grab the URL of our development environment, the one that's got the Gitpod part in it. So I actually closed one too many tabs, but if I reopen my application, you should have a URL that looks a bit like 8888 it probably actually says Dechrai workshop because that's the name of the repository, / some random number, gitpod.io. That's the URL you want to copy. So I'm going to copy that into my clipboard. And then back in application details, we want to scroll down to the application URIs. So in here, we're going to be defining three things. We're going to be defining the callback URI, the allowed logout URL, and the web origins. This is basically telling Auth0 where it's allowed to send information to about the logged in user. So it's not going to accidentally send it to a different application. So I want to say yes if, in fact, if you've copied the trailing slash, just remove that. So it just ends in IO. So we're going to tell Auth0 that once the user is logged in, it's allowed to send an auth code to this URL. And that'll be different for each of you. Similarly, take off the slash on this one. When a user logs out, Auth0 is permitted to redirect them back to this URL. That's so you can't get a man in the middle attack where there's a logout button that then redirects you to a different website completely, but looks like your website. So it's to mitigate that kind of thing. And then finally, we have the allowed web origins. So again, remove the trailing slash if you have it. This is basically so that, you know, in single page applications, if you refresh the page or if you right click open in a new tab, then you lose the state of the application. There's a lot of stuff in memory that's no longer there. Your application won't know whether a user is logged in or not. So what it does is it actually uses web workers to make a connection to your Auth0 tenant to say, hey, is this user logged in? And because that's a server, it's got a session with your browser, so it can say, yes, Ben's logged in, and it'll send information back to that web worker, which then allows the web worker to tell your application who's logged in. And in order to make sure that only your application can make that call, Auth0 will only accept requests for that, what they call transparent re-authentication. It'll only accept requests from allowed web origins. So these are just three things that keep your application more secure. And then if you scroll to the bottom, there's a save changes. You might have a newer interface. There might be a save changes at the bottom statically. But if not, find the save changes button and click on that. How are you two doing with catching up? Are you good? Yep, all right. And then we're going to use Auth0 to store a bit of information. We'll get into what public-private key encryption is soon, but essentially we need to store the public and private key somewhere, and we're going to use Auth0 as a store for that. So if you find on the left-hand side the Actions menu, and in there you'll find a library. So head over to Actions and Library. You'll see this page here, which will hopefully be about as interestingly blank as mine. And then just copy this bit of code here. Whenever we copy and paste code, we'll do the copy and paste first into the destination, and then I'll talk through what's actually going on so we understand what's happening under the hood. So copy that. In here, click on Build Custom. I always accidentally click on Add Action, but that'll add like a pre-configured action. We want to build a custom action. Give it a name. It can be called Add Metadata. You can call it whatever you want, really. It doesn't actually matter. We're going to keep the login trigger, so every time somebody logs in, this code is going to get run. And then on the resulting page, you'll see we can add some code in here. This is actually allowing you, if you select lines 7 and 8 and replace that with what you copied, this is allowing you to run arbitrary code on Auth0 servers while people are logging in, which is kind of powerful. And what this is doing, essentially, so if there's two parameters that come in, event is everything to do with what's just happened, like the user that's logged in, browser information, other information you might need. API is all of the actions you can take inside here. So we want to set the identity token. Within the identity token, we want to set a custom claim, and we're going to add this information. Now, who here is familiar with a JSON Web Token? A couple of you. That's about what most people know, and that's fine. So a JSON Web Token is basically 3 components separated by dots when you look at it as a pure string. The middle part is what's called the payload, and if you base64 URL decode that, it gives you a bit of JSON. And that JSON will give you the subject, like the identity of the person who's logged in, the expiry of the token, the issuer of the token, various other kinds of information. What we're doing here is we want to set a custom claim. Those are called claims, because the token claims that the subject is Ben. So we want to add another claim in. We want to claim the user metadata is this information over here that we get from somewhere. So we're basically adding something into that JSON. And the advantage of doing that here is that because Auth0 is generating the JSON Web Token, it'll take your extra claims and then it'll regenerate the third part, which is the signature, so that when it gets returned to our React application, the JSON Web Token is valid still, but it contains extra information that we've added in. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to add some user metadata, which is going to be the public and private key, but we'll get to that. And that gets stored in the user object in Auth0. Make sense? It'll make more sense as you actually start seeing what that data is and how we set it. But that's what we're doing. We're basically passing extra information back once the user logs in. So if you click on deploy in the top right-hand side, this just deploys it to be available for use. If you head over to flows on the left-hand side, after you click the deploy button, there's flows on the left-hand side. And we want to edit the login flow. So we've defined this custom action, but we need to define when this happens in the flow, because you can have multiples. And then come over to the custom tab over here, and you'll find the add metadata, or whatever name you gave it. You'll find your custom action over here, and just drag that into the pipeline. So this allows you to have multiple actions that can happen in a preset order that you define, but we've only got the one, so there's only one place to put it. And then you click on apply, which was in the top right. And that's it now. Every time somebody logs in, that code is going to get run. All right? This sounds almost like a workshop for Auth0, but it isn't. Okie doke. So we've done that. Let's next enunciate words better. Create our Supabase tables. So again, open in a new tab the Supabase project listing page, which will take you to a page that looks a little like this. Hopefully you've got no projects. Does anybody see any projects? Because if you do, then it means you're using a different Supabase account and we're about to break your production servers or something. I don't know. I don't want anybody to be messing with anything that's going to actually affect something that's in production at the moment. So you've got a new project in there. Let's click on new project and give it a name. I'm going to call it Secure Messenger and type in a strong password. You don't actually, I don't think you actually need to remember this for the purposes of the workshop. If you're doing this, remember the password. But I'm just going to generate a strong password and then promptly forget it. And click on Create New Project. Essentially what that does is it gives you like the root password to your PostgreSQL database, but we don't need that for the purposes of this workshop. At the end of it, you can delete this again and whatever. So for a while, it's going to say you're setting up a project. And we can't really move forward until that's finished. But I'll just come over to the previous page and we'll look at the code in here before we then copy and paste it over while that's happening in the background. So we want to create a new table called messages, and we're going to be storing an ID. Most things are good with an ID, a sender, the actual message, and the timestamp that it was created. It's kind of the minimum you need for any messaging app. And then this part here is basically setting up the capability for us to communicate with Supabase on a real-time connection. That means that we can actually, rather than polling Supabase every minute or second or whatever, we can get our React app to create a permanent connection to our Supabase table. So if anything changes in the table, our React app gets notified of that through an event immediately, which is kind of cool. Which means that and eventually we'll have two windows open, like a private browser and a regular browser, and you'll be logged into your app with two different people. And when you type hello on one, it'll appear on the other immediately because we've set up this real-time communication stuff. So hopefully I've waffled enough. Yep. You should now see something like this on your Supabase dashboard. If you head over on the left to the one that looks like a command line, it's the SQL editor. Then you'll get a SQL entry interface. So let's just copy this and paste it in. You'll get an alert saying you're doing destructive stuff because we're actually dropping a table, we're dropping information, that's fine, because we're setting up for the first time. Basically what we're doing is we're dropping any of the real-time stuff and then recreating it. So run destructive query. And then if you go to the icon just above it, the table editor, you should see, after it's loaded, the messages table on the left-hand side. Give me a little wave when you're up to this point. Still waiting for project setup. Excellent. There we go. So just a reminder of where those were. There's the SQL editor on the left-hand side there. That's the first stop. And that's where you copy and paste the messages table, create SQL into. How are you going with getting into Gitpod? Still no joy?
Saying a different account.
Oh no.
Maybe my phone number, but
Ah. Did you try it on the conference Wi-Fi as well?
yeah, I switched it. So,
I'm sorry. That's frustrating.
oh well.
I don't know why they don't like Lithuanian. Well, your Lithuanian phone number anyway. How are you going? Yeah, so in the instructions there was the SQL to copy. Yeah, so if you copy that and then just paste it in there and click on run down at the bottom right. And yes, that's okay to run destructive query. All good?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've copied this. There's usually a, I don't know, maybe, usually. If you go to the command line looking one, SQL editor, and then paste it in there, and click on run or control enter, and that's okay to do, yes. Yep, and then just paste the SQL into that box.
In this one.
Yep. And then run, and okay. Does everybody see the messages table? Anybody else need a hand? Excellent. Cool. So I think, unless I'm mistaken, no, yeah, we need to configure React now to be able to connect to our Supabase app. So we're going to create a .env file in the start directory, not in the root directory of the project. And we're going to copy this information here, and we're going to put that into the env file, and then I'll show you where to find those API keys. So over here, if you right-click on Start, click on New File, .env, and paste that in. Is that big enough for the back? Good. All right, Auth0 stuff. If we go back into our Auth0 tab over here, come over to Applications, Applications. On the left-hand side, you've got Applications. I don't know why they're both called Applications, but that's the way it is, so that's the way we deal with it. And then we open My Secure Messenger. You just click on that. Scroll down just a little bit. Under Basic Information, you'll find Domain and Client ID. They're the two bits of information we want. So I'll copy the domain, and I will paste that in for the domain. If anybody has Grammarly installed, you might want to say it's not very useful on Gitpod. All right. And then just underneath it was the client ID, and we'll paste that in here. Now the client ID is actually publicly, it's not sensitive information. So it doesn't matter if, I'm going to delete this one later anyway, but it doesn't matter that you can see it. But also it's the kind of thing that you can just have lying around in your application, but obviously you want to put it into environment variables, but it's not sensitive information. If you right click on Start, and then I'm moving too much. It's also falling off my ear. No, I'm good. Thank you. All right. I don't know why. Oh, you're in GitHub. You need to be in your Gitpod editor, the one with the orange G. There you go. So if you right click on start. Yeah. And then new file. Everyone got the end file in there? Cool. And you've got the Auth0 data. The Supabase stuff is hidden down under, I don't see it here now because it's too big. Down here under project settings in the cog on the left from your Supabase. If you open that, and then you'll see API as a second level menu. It's making a lot of noise, eh? Is there anything I can do to stop the clicking, or you're okay? All good. Click on API, and here we've got the project URL and the public key right here. Those are the two items we want. So I'm going to copy the public URL. I'm going to paste that in here. I'm going to copy, where did it go? The anon public. There are two. There's a secret one, there's a public one. Make sure you copy the public one. Copy that and paste that in here. Yes.
Did you do that for
So you need to go to over here into applications, and then open your secure messenger and copy the domain, and then paste that in on the first line. Replace all of that here. And then over in this one again. That'll be the client ID. Yep. And then in Supabase, if you click on the cog, settings, the cog, oh yeah, and then go to API. You need this one and that one to replace those two bits of code with. If you click on this one here, no, the left one, right and left, that's it. Then you should see, yep, messages has appeared, so you're good. Anyone else need a hand? Are we good to move on? Yep. That's all right. If you, so if you go to, what are you looking at, the tenant settings, yeah, so on this one here, there is, it's hard for me to make out on this screen. Can I just have a look for a second? Thanks. That was tenant settings, so if we go to, I think that one's applications, yeah, applications, and then your secure messenger, and then onto the settings tab, basic information, you've got the domain and the client ID. Welcome. All right. I'll keep going. Shout at me if I'm going too fast. Shout at me nicely. Where are we up to? All right, so that's all done. Now what we need to do is the .env file won't actually be read by npm or Netlify unless we restart it. So over here, back in your terminal, if it's still running, Control-C to end, and then run Netlify dev again. That's now going to pull in the .env file, which is going to bring in the API details that we need for Auth0 and Supabase, which means theoretically now, if we refresh once it's running, there you go, port 8888 is running. If I refresh this page now, I should get a chat room. Everybody have a chat room? Once you've done all the configuration, we need to reload the .env file. So I just stopped Netlify dev running and restarted it. That's all I did. So does anybody not see this after doing that? don't know it's my hair, but I'm going to tie it back just in case. It's bugging me. It's probably bugging everybody else even more. All right, hopefully that's less hassle now. I don't know, it's still happening. Whatever. We'll deal with it. Anybody not get to this point? Anybody need a bit more time? Now, if you type a message, you'll be happy to know nothing actually happens. That's expected. Just in case you're wondering if something's broken. It's all good. Let's jump back over to the instructions. We're still on step 2. Step 2 is the longest one because we're doing a lot of setup at the moment. We need to require our application to now have authentication. You can't send a message unless you know who's sending the message. So let's add authentication into our application so that we can then get the username out and associate that with the sender of the message. So if you open start source app.js, let me bring this over here, make it easier. Source app.js. This is a stock standard ish app. You can see, did I open the right one? Am I jumping a step? Oh yes, I'm jumping a step ahead of myself. So in this area here, what we want to do is to wire up the authentication requirement. This application, the way you can do most authentications, not just an Auth0 thing, you can either have an entire application protected. If you hit any route at all, you need to authenticate. Or you can have selective authentication where you can get to the home page, for example, but if you want to get to the admin section, then you have to log in. Or maybe you can have it even more granular and say if you want access to this certain component, then you need to log in. Because this application is mostly useless without being logged in, and also we don't want to show the public the list of messages, we're going to make the entire application protected by authentication. So in order to do that, we want to copy this first line here, and we're going to edit the first line of this existing code. You can see here already we're using Auth0 from Auth0 React. That's basically giving us a handler to be able to do login stuff. We're going to replace this line with the one we copied from the instructions, and that basically gets us access to an extra method called with authentication required, which you can actually wrap around an entire component. So then down here on line 25, we can replace this line here. You can see all that I've really done is wrapped the app in with authentication required. You actually need to remove that line as well, but I just want to show you the comparison. So basically we're taking the app component, the entire app, and we're saying authentication is required in order to render this app. And now if I hit save, where's it gone? And come back to my messenger, and you hit refresh, you should be redirected to a login page. Does anybody not get a login page? You need to get rid of the less thans and greater thans on either side.
Okay. The first problem, I'm getting 404 error. Yeah, save that. Restart the...
It does look very empty.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does.
Did you have you managed to get it running at all, even with the error message before?
Yeah, I had it. I attempted to just start everything from the step 0.
Yeah. Let's have a look at Gitpod again.
Gitpod, okay.
And then down here, if you just stop Netlify dev.
I got some errors.
Yeah.
I think.
If you stop Netlify dev for a second
Okay.
and type in git status or something, let's see if there's files missing. Deleted. Yeah, somehow you've managed to delete all those files.
Okay.
So if you just do a git checkout, it'll probably pull everything back in.
Check out. Okay. The error didn't appear.
It's up to date with origin main. No. I don't know how you managed to do that. My only recommendation would be to start over,
All right.
rather, unless you can get, actually,
Oh, yeah.
you can probably just restore, there we go.
Well,
No,
we don't want to delete the
there you go. Good luck with that. Let me know if you still need help. All right, I see by looking over some of your shoulders that you've actually already managed to create an account and send messages, so that's cool. Yay! But it's not secure. So I'm just going to come in quickly and hit sign up. Yay! So does anybody not manage to get a message to show up? This is you logging into your app, so you need to sign up and create a new account. Yeah. It gets very confusing when you use Auth0 because you've got your Auth0 login, got your Auth0 tenant logins, and you've got all sorts of other API logins. That's why I use the same password everywhere. I don't. Don't do that at home, kids. Don't reuse your passwords. Okay, so I'm hoping that you've managed to get to this point, and we'll just move straight along, and we'll start looking at encryption. So I wanted to add a slide to describe how public-private keys work, because I gave this workshop a few months ago, and I did it by like waving my hands around and stuff, and I thought it probably easier to find an image instead. So I found this, which I've borrowed without permission from FreeCodeCamp. And this is how PGP works for email. And essentially it's the same kind of thing. We're encrypting a message. That's all PGP. PGP stands for Pretty Good Privacy. And GPG, which is the GNU Privacy Guard, is basically an open source implementation of PGP. But essentially what it is a way of using public-private key encryption and decryption to store messages in a way that can only be read by certain people. And essentially what you do is when you create, you might have heard the term key pair. So you've got a public key and a private key, and the two are linked in some way. You use a public key for encryption, which seems a little bit weird, like surely you'd need to use a private for encryption. But essentially, if you want to send me an email, I would give you my public key, and you would use my public key to encrypt the message to me. I then need the private key to decrypt it. So the public key can be sent to everyone. And that's the idea, is that I can freely give it to everybody. Before that with what's called, so this is an asymmetric form of encryption, where there are two sides, two different sides. Symmetric encryption is where I say, my password is Bob, and you then encrypt a message with Bob, and then I know that it's Bob, but if anybody else finds out it's Bob, then we're buggered. So, hey? Passwordless doesn't give you the public-private key and ability to do encryption, though. You still need that public-private key set, and a private key will need a passphrase. You can use passwordless and ways of securely storing data to make it easier to unlock things. For example, if you have a PGP-enabled email app on your phone, it'll probably use Face ID or Fingerprint ID to unlock your private key. But the public-private key is still a mechanism required for asymmetric encryption. So that's what we're going to be using today. We'll be creating public-private key through our applications for each of our users. And then in order to decrypt it, like I mentioned, you need the private key. Now the advantage is that a message can be encrypted with multiple public keys. If I sent a message to all of you, if all of you gave me your individual public keys and I sent it to all of you, each of you would be able to decrypt that message with your own private key. But somebody outside of this room with their private key would not be able to decrypt it. Now one thing we'll notice as we go through this is we'll eventually log in as a second person, and that second person will not be able to decrypt some of the older messages because when those messages were sent, that person's public key didn't exist. So it also gives you like a time security, like until somebody joins a group, they can't read previous messages. So you don't have to worry about previous messages being leaked because they're all encrypted, because they can only decrypt the ones that their public key was used to encrypt. Does that make sense? You don't need to know the exact technicals about how it works, but I just want you to have an overview of how these work so when we start looking at where these things are stored, we can be aware of the security implications of that. All right, so let's find some way to store our keys. So when we're sending messages, I'm going to want to have all of your public keys. So we need to store your public keys somewhere so that when I'm sending messages, I can say, hey, give me those public keys so I can encrypt this message. We're going to put those in Supabase. Supabase, if you dug any deeper, where's my Supabase gone? Here it is. If you actually click on the messages table, so I've gone back to Supabase on the top left-hand side, I've gone to table editor, and then I'm going to have a look at the messages table. You'll see this lovely warning here saying you're allowing anonymous access to your table. You'll note that when we configured our React app to connect to Supabase, we use a public key, not a private key. Now, ideally, you'd probably set up a private key, private API connection. It's not public-private key. But you would set up a more secure connection. What we're doing is we're reading from Supabase as a public feed. But if everything's encrypted, then it shouldn't really matter, right? It's a good idea to put that extra level of protection. It's the Swiss cheese model. You don't want just one hole, you want multiple holes that hopefully get covered up. But we do have public access to these. We're now going to create a second table. So let's head over on the left-hand side to SQL editor. If you still have the old SQL in there, just select that and delete it. And copy this SQL from, so we're now on step 3. Copy this SQL over, and we'll paste that in to here and click run. Now we've got 2 tables, one for the messages, one for the keys. And if we jump back over to the table editor, we'll see keys has arrived, and in there we store an ID, the key, and when it was created. That's all that goes in there. We don't actually care whose key it is, we just care that there's a key that we want to encrypt stuff with. We all good at that point? All right. So the next thing we want to do is now store, and also you'll note here that we call this key, that's only going to be the public key. We're not going to store the private key here, because we don't want that accessible in an open, like it says up there, anonymous access. We don't want anonymous access to our private keys. So we're only going to store public keys in here. But when I log in, I need access to my public key and private key, because I need access to my public key in order to be able to share it with people, and my private key in order to be able to decrypt messages that have come to me. We don't really have any way to store that. We could store that in Supabase as well, and we could increase the security on that. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to use Auth0 for that. So remember we wrote some code before in that action that pulls out the user metadata and includes it in the JSON Web Token that comes back to our application. If you come over to User Management, Users, you'll find your user that you just created to log into your application. This is not your Auth0 user, this is your MySecure Messenger user. And inside here, if you scroll down slightly, you'll see there are 2 metadata storage areas, user metadata and app metadata. User metadata is information that's kind of accessible by the user and modifiable by the user. App is only modifiable by the app. Now in our case, I think we used app metadata because we want to apply a bit more security around it. Let me just double check that I did that. We use user metadata, but it's not overly important because it's information that's associated with this user. Now you will spot the first security flaw here, in that once we store the public and private key in the user metadata, any administrator of your Auth0 tenant has access to all of the private keys. So you have to trust your administrators, but that's kind of one of the rules anyway. Now in an ideal world, you would never share your private key with anyone. What I would like to do, if we had like a day or a 2-day workshop, is to get it to the point where the private key is stored only in the application. And in that case, you probably want a mobile app because you want some kind of persistence. You want a data store that you trust that's local just to you. If you use Signal Messenger, for example, the private key is stored only in the application. It's never shared. In this case, we're sharing it because we only have 3 hours, and it's a good place to store it for now. But that's my first security consideration and warning, is what we're doing here is not necessarily 100% perfect. But we're going to store the public and the private key for each user in their, against their user metadata in their user profile in Auth0. So, having done that, the Netlify function at functions/save keys, if you want to look at this in your own time later, that'll detail exactly how it connects to Auth0 and it takes the information and stores the public-private key there. But the most important thing we want to really look at today is how all of this works. So let's actually generate the keys in JavaScript. I've pre-installed OpenPGP JS in your repositories already through the npm install that we did at the beginning of the workshop. But that's the OpenPGP module. That's what we're using for public-private key generation, encryption, decryption. All of those methods are wrapped up in that tool. So let's grab this code here and go to start source app.js and replace the entire contents. Start source app.js, which is already open. I'm just going to replace the entire contents with this because there's a bit more stuff going on in there, and we'll go through and have a look at what's going on. So we're putting a few extra things out. So this use auth0 hook that we had from the beginning, we're going to pull a couple of extra helpers and methods out of that. We want to know if the user is authenticated. If they're not authenticated, then we've got an issue because they shouldn't be loading this component anyway. So the likelihood is yes, but the thing is that when the app first starts, the answer is no, and it's going to have to take some time to work out whether or not that user is authenticated. So as soon as we know the user is authenticated, we know we have access to the user object, which is the third one there, and from that we can get a bit of extra information. We want a call to log out, so that if they're logged in, they can log out. And finally, we want get access token silently. So the JSON Web Tokens we were talking about before, when you log in, you get an ID token, which is about the person, and you get an access token, which is a token that that user or a system can use to access systems on behalf of that user. So because we're going to be making a call to some of the cloud functions, those cloud functions can't be called publicly, they need some kind of security on them as well. So the access token is used to say, hey, Ben is accessing this API endpoint and has permission to do so. So we need to be able to get access to that access token. By default, it doesn't come out of auth0, so you need this function to make that request. We need a passphrase for the private key, so we're going to store that. And then we're also going to have our key set, which we're storing somewhere. So we're basically using state here to store those. Use effect is called the first time the component is loaded. And we're going to say if the user is authenticated, so it'll run a couple of times, and down at the bottom here, we'll be passing in is user authenticated as one of the parameters into there. So when that changes, this function will get run again. So when that eventually eventuates to true, then we're going to ask, first of all, is the user metadata already in there? Remember when we log in through auth0, it adds user metadata in through that action. So it's going to say, is that metadata available? Which it should be. If not, we're going to have an issue, so we just bomb out at that point. Then we're going to get the keys from that metadata. Are the keys in there already? The first time you log in, they won't be. We just saw when we looked at my user object, user metadata was empty. So if that's the case, we're going to call the setKeys function, which itself will actually ask for the keys. And then finally, if we haven't found any keys and we have the user's passphrase, we generate a new key pair. So at this point here, we generate keys for the user. It's going to require that passphrase. And then we get the access token, and then once we have that access token, we're going to make a call to the save keys function that I referenced in the document before. It's not important what goes on in there, like we don't need to look at the code, but essentially what we're doing is saying, hey, we've just generated this key pair, store it in the auth0 user metadata for this user. Does that make sense? And basically in there we're storing the user ID, the access token, and the data itself, the keys. Finally down here, we've just got a couple of things for rendering. If we don't have a passphrase yet, ask for it. If we have the passphrase, but we don't have the keys, then generate them, or at least just put a message saying, hey, we're generating keys. And then once we have a passphrase and the keys, then we show messages, which is another component, which basically lists those messages out. But we pass into there the keys and the passphrase, so the messages component can decrypt them. Yeah? For those who haven't done much React before, does that make sense? For those who have, I'm hoping it does. All right, I'm going to save that. And then, I think we can just refresh and it should work. So, good luck everybody. Do a hard refresh, and you should be asked for a passphrase. There we go. Let's make this a bit bigger. So I'll put in a bit of information about its secure key, like you shouldn't use the same as your auth0 login because that kind of defeats the point. So I'm going to use a really, really, really secure passphrase that nobody will ever guess in order to generate my public-private key pair. And you don't need to do this part, but I just want to remind you that currently user metadata here is empty and the keys table is empty. Once I set this passphrase, it goes through the generating keys and it takes me to the chat room. So that part is working now. If I refresh this, and this was automatically refreshed, you can see the public key now, as evidenced by saying public key, is in Supabase. And now that this is refreshed, you can see that the private key and the public key are now in my user metadata. So every time I log in now, and I'll log out and I'll log back in a second, every time I log in now, this public-private key is going to come back in through that JSON web token that our React app can then pull out and use to decrypt messages in the future, which means that our application doesn't have to remember those bits of information every time. So if I write hello again, we'll get a message that says hello. If I log out and log back in again, you can see it should take us straight to, oh no, I need to unlock my messages this time because it's got my private key, but it doesn't know the passphrase. So now I can unlock my messages, type in that code, and it pulls those two out again. If we jump back over to our messages table, we can see that they're not encrypted. So that doesn't really help, right? So let's encrypt those messages. Encrypting messages. Yes? Get fired, and when that happens, we can grab those new messages from Supabase and put them into our local state representation of all the messages we have. So if one person posts something, the other application is going to get a notification of that. When we unload this component, when we go somewhere else, we're going to unsubscribe. That's just like kind of cleaning up. We don't want a subscription going on in the background when we're not actually rendering anything. We've got a handle form submit here. Basically what happens there is that any information that is in the messages form is going to get sent to Supabase. We're going to send in the nickname of the user that's logged in and the message that they just posted. Then we're going to reset the new message so the form field goes blank again, and then we've got the JSX HTML output itself. We've got the header, we've got a list of all the messages, we loop through them and render the message component, and we pass into it the message ID and the actual message. And then we've got the form at the bottom, which is where we type our new messages. This is fine because it's all unencrypted. We're going to need to make a number of changes to this to make it work on encrypted messages and to encrypt them in the first place. So the first thing we want to do is copy this here. We're not going to replace the entire code base, we're just going to replace the handle form submit. So if you copy this, come back over here, the handle form submit, let me just make this a bit bigger, was this one up here where we basically took the new message that was being typed and the nickname and sent it to Supabase. And that's all this one does. If we replace this, you can see we're doing a few extra things now. We're going to get the public keys from Supabase. So remember all the keys, all the public keys are stored in the keys table. So we're going to say to Supabase, send me all of your public keys. We do this on every message because we don't know whether somebody else has logged in and added their public key in. So we want all the current public keys that we have in the keys table and grab those down. And then we're going to use the encrypt message with public key function that comes from the OpenPGP library. And we're going to encrypt the message, and we're also going to encrypt the sender. So now we've got encrypted versions of the message and the sender's name because we don't want to leak who's talking either. We want to keep as much as possible encrypted. And then this here is pretty much exactly what we had before, but instead of sending user.nickname and new message, we're sending the encrypted versions of those two. That's the only change to that. And if I check my notes, I think that's all we need to do. Yeah. So if you save that, you shouldn't need to reload the application. Oh, by the way, did anybody come back to see that Gitpod has gone to sleep? Or you have? So one thing that is not currently working if you run Netlify dev is Netlify dev, because it was installed as a global module. So all of your files are still intact, but because the workspace shut down, the server actually stopped, it started a new server, and anything outside of this document root is reset. So you just need to npm install Netlify dev again. It's this is Netlify CLI, there we go. It's this one here. npm install Netlify-CLI space -g, which you'll find on step 0 or 1 or 2 if you want it, but that's what you want to type in there. So I'll leave that up for just another second. one of the downsides. I mean, it's good that it shut it down because it wasn't billing you any of your free hours while you're having lunch. Thank you. Okay, so that's just finished running. So now Netlify Dev should start up your Messenger app again. If we head over here, oh, it's decided to open it in another tab. 404 not found. What's gone wrong? I think I know what's gone wrong. I did not change into the start directory because that also reset because it is a brand new instance, right? So make sure you're in the start directory and run Netlify Dev again. And make port 8888 public again. That's probably also reset. I just got one of the little pop-up dialogues just saying, do you want to make it public? So I said yes. And now I should be able to open this one and probably going to have to log in. So all zeros, remember, we're logged in, so that's cool. Just need to re-enter my passphrase to be able to decrypt messages. And we've got the old messages here, but they're the unencrypted ones, right? Is everybody back to this spot? Has anybody typed a new message in yet? Go on, send a new message. See who's working, which means it's not encrypting. You should get that, because basically we're not decrypting messages yet, but we're now encrypting them and sending them into Supabase. So did you replace that code? So this one here, did you do that bit?
No, I didn't just basically use that message.
So it should be handle form submit, that one there. Yeah.
Just replace it.
Yep, but the whole function.
What name?
All the way from the beginning, const all the way to the semicolon. I think you've got reset the input there twice. You didn't get to the end of the function, so remove those 3 lines. That's it.
Okay.
And now you should be able to just save and just type a message, because it should auto reload. Nope. Yay! Alright, do you have a encrypted message? You do? Cool. Everyone has an encrypted message. Cool. End of workshop. Congratulations, everyone. Unless, of course, some of your users don't know how to decrypt PGP messages in their head. Should we do that bit as well? Kind of close the loop? Okay. I'm glad you agree. If you're like, nah, we're good, we're going to go now, be a bit disappointing. All right, let's decrypt the messages. So essentially what we're going to be doing here is we're modifying, remember how in the messages component we were calling the message every time? And we were just passing into there the name and the message itself, which wasn't, like we're now passing in encrypted messages, which is why the message component can't decrypt it. So we need to give the message component a bit more information. So we're going to pass in there the private key of the current user so that it can get decrypted, and also the passphrase so we can unlock that private key. So just copy this first line here and jump into the messages plural file again. And you'll find on roughly line 81 the message, and we're passing in the ID and the message. We'll replace that. Just clean this up. So now we're passing in the message ID still. Well, we're not actually passing it in, we're providing that as a key, which is something that React likes when you're looping through. So we're passing in the message itself. Now remember, this message is encrypted. So then we're passing in the private key and the passphrase. Yeah? So I'm going to hit save on that one. And then we want to jump over to the message singular file, because now we need to get the message component to actually be able to use this. And we're going to replace the entire content. I mean, we can have a quick look at it if we want. It basically just pulls in the current time zone so that no matter where you are in the world, the time that's shown on the screen is actually relevant for you. And then we're just printing out the time, who wrote the message, and the message itself. If we replace this with the code we just copied, we'll see that again we're using this use effect method of running code when the component first loads. And we're going to get the sender and we're going to decrypt it, and we're going to store the results of that decryption into the sender variable or the sender state. Otherwise, we leave it as blank and we set censored to true, so we know this bit of information couldn't be decrypted. And that could happen if I join a chat channel halfway through, there's a whole lot of conversations, and those messages weren't encrypted with my public key, so I can't decrypt them. So this could actually potentially happen, and we'll see it happening in a second. And then we do the same with the message. So that's basically a copy and paste, but instead of decrypting the sender, we decrypt the message. And then down at the bottom here, we just have a bit of niceties. If the whole message is censored, then we're going to say we can't decrypt it. Otherwise, we return the same information we had before, but now showing the decrypted information. We've also got a temporary thing. While sender is false and decrypted message is false, while we haven't worked out whether or not we can decrypt them, we just say, this message is currently being decrypted. So if we save that and head back over here, you'll need to refresh to pull in the new code. And then you'll probably need to provide your passphrase again. And for a second, you'll see that all of them will say decrypting, and then eventually it'll show you the message. Now, of course, the first two weren't encrypted, so it's trying to PGP decrypt plain text. It's never going to happen. So it throws an error, which is why it says message cannot be decrypted. But now, if you go to, let's copy this, open a private browsing window or another browser in Safari or IE, or so, IE doesn't exist anymore. What am I talking about? You know, any other browser, and reopen your application in that other browser, and now sign up with a different account, not the same account. And this here, the email address doesn't actually need to be real. I'm going to sign in as Mary@example.com. Personal request. If you make up email addresses, always use example.com, because if you choose blah blah blah.com, that probably exists, and Mary's going to hate you, because she probably gets all the spam. So I'm going to create an account as Mary, log in. Now, when we get a list of all the messages, I shouldn't be able to read any of them, right? I need to create a passphrase. I'm going to be slightly more secure and do it backwards. Generating keys, loading messages, and none of those messages can be decrypted, because Mary's key didn't exist until right now. But now that it's in Supabase, if we jump back over to, I don't even know where my browsers are. There it is. If we jump back over to here, we will now see there's our encrypted message, but under keys we now have two keys. So there's Mary's public key has now been added in. So now when I, as Ben, type a new message, hi Mary, and post, and then switch straight over, you'll see that it automatically refreshed. That's the Supabase real-time connection thing going on. Pulled it out and decrypted it straight away. However, if we look in the, where am I going? One of these. Looking over here, we've now got a second message, but it's also encrypted. But Mary can't read any of the older messages because her key didn't exist until then. Kind of cool. So, having gotten it working now, what security vulnerabilities and flaws do you see in this? Why would you not put this into production? I gave you one already. That's that the administrator of your Auth0 tenant can read everybody's private keys. Of course, sure, but in an ideal world, in perfect end-to-end encryption, you wouldn't share your key off the device that actually decrypts. And that's how a lot of like WhatsApp works like that and Signal works like that. You would store the private key, which is why when you transfer or when you here actually use a Signal as a messenger. Have you tried Signal Desktop? It's a desktop application that allows you to read all of your Signal messages. But in order to sign up, it'll show you a QR code, and you have to scan it with your phone. And what that does is it creates a short-term connection between the two devices for the private key to be transmitted to your desktop. So it never actually goes via a server. Well, it kind of does, but encrypted. It encrypted and then encrypted over encrypted TLS channel, encrypted, super encrypted, magic, something like that. It's possible, actually. You see, if it was going the other way, then you could actually put your private key in the QR code. but then you'd need to scan the QR code on your phone from your laptop using the. But anyway, that's how it works. So it doesn't actually persist anywhere in the cloud. We're persisting the secret key in the private key in the cloud, which is not ideal. But I would still say that this is much more secure than MSN Messenger. Does that still exist? Am I showing my age? Probably.
So the browser knows you're logged in. The other account, like encrypted token,
The
you logged in with one account.
Yep.
Use the Mary to log in.
Yeah, so I've got two different browsers running. So they're independent. One of them is a private browser. The other one is
Mary didn't have to authenticate.
She did, yeah. So when I went through that and I logged in through Auth0. I signed up a new account and I created Mary at example.com. So Mary now has an account in Auth0. If we jump over to user management users, we can see Mary in here. And if we look at Mary, we can see that she has a public key and a private key stored in her user metadata. So if let's open a third browser. This is fun. And go to this. So anybody can go to this URL. I can share it with you all, and you could go to this URL. That'd be kind of fun, actually. So in here, I just went to sign up, and I signed up. Let's not do Gmail. Wow. Thanks, Safari. Let me choose my own password. Thanks. I guess that's useful. So at this point here, this is creating the user in Auth0. And then at that point, it is going to try and grab the user metadata out using the action that we created and send that back to our application, but there aren't going to be any keys in it. So our application then says, okay, well, we don't have a passphrase yet and we don't have the keys. Go away. Too useful. Not now. Yeah, so we don't have the passphrase, we don't have the keys, so we give it a passphrase to make this one even more secure. This passphrase is just stored in your application, in memory during the operation of the application, and it's used as a passphrase for generating the public-private key pair. And you need that passphrase in the future to unlock the private key in order to be able to decrypt messages. So this doesn't actually get stored anywhere, except in your head, and maybe a password manager, and temporarily in memory while your application is running.
So it's on the server.
It's in the React app. Yeah. So it never leaves the React app. It never leaves your browser tab. So it's fully secure. Storing information in variables in your React app is not 100% secure. Say again? 90%? Apparently it's 90% secure. I don't have stats on that. It all depends. So it's not 100%. It's like on 98 or... That wasn't me. I'll blame that guy. There we go. So yeah, I mean, you could have a plugin in your browser that has access to all of the in-memory JavaScript. You can't really go through and say, hey, what's the version of the passphrase, but you could scour and do a memory dump of everything. You could have cross-site scripting attacks that could inject JavaScript into your application that can pull it out. So it's never a perfectly secure environment, but it's certainly better than storing it in a cookie or in local storage or anything like that. So yeah, and keeping it only while the application is running keeps it a lot more secure. But yes, there is definitely a small window of opportunity there for something to happen. The other thing that I'm not overly happy with is, we did touch on this before, this part here. It's still a big hole. I don't like the idea. Again, if somebody can pull all these messages out, there's not a huge risk because they have to get the private key of somebody who had a private key when these were sent. If they created an account and generated their own public-private key pair, they'd be able to get that private key, but these weren't encrypted with their public key, so they still wouldn't be able to read it. So there's still a level of assurance there that it's only encrypted for people who were a member of the system at the time the message was sent. But there's still, the more information you give an attacker, the more chance there is that they'll be able to get through that hole eventually. Even the administrator of your Auth0 tenant who has access to your private key can't decrypt it without your passphrase. So a sufficiently secure passphrase, AAA is not a good one, that's just a gentle hint. Sufficiently secure passphrase is going to help you. But if they've got all the private keys and they've got all of the encrypted messages, then that just gives them even more scope for, well, if you're brute forcing, the chances of getting the password for one private key is lowish. But if you've got 500 private keys, you can test one password against 500 and maybe your chances of guessing the password is more correct or more likely. So there's still a few holes in here. I wouldn't put this into production. But hopefully it's giving you an idea of how public-private key encryption works, where its value sits, how not to treat the data, don't make it public. Spend an extra couple of hours securing this, writing another Netlify function that actually connects securely to Supabase. Use a JSON web token, access token generated for your user so that that endpoint that you've created can only be accessed by people who are authenticated to your app. You're adding more layers of cheese to that security model. So this is the only other part really that I don't like very much. But other than that, if you needed to do end-to-end encryption within any of the applications that you have at work or your personal projects, this will get you 99% of the way there, and then you just need to close those extra few holes. If we had an extra half a day, this was supposed to be a 1 day originally, and we would have dug into that. But if we had an extra half a day, we would go into that. But I just wanted to point out that those are the kind of things that we would be looking at in the second half, just to make it more secure. The problem also is it's a lot less sexy, because it's just digging deep and like closing holes, but it's an important part of development. So that's all I have for you. Congratulations, you just wrote a secure messenger end to end. Yeah, right. Give yourselves a pat on the back. Thank you for coming. I'm going to be sticking around because we've still got like an hour. Like I said, it's usually a 2-hour course, the short version. So, but if you've got any more questions or you want to dig into making it more secure and get me to give you a hand, just let me know. But thanks for your time. I hope you enjoyed it.
You mentioned that you would store the private key on a mobile app inside the app. Where would you store it?
Depends. So a lot of the native mobile app languages and I guess the frameworks that you're building on top of have secure key storage mechanisms. So I would look into the specific secure storage mechanisms for Android and iOS devices. If you're working outside of that, I'm not familiar with non-Android and iOS secure development side of things, but a lot of places will have a vault of some sort that you can store data in, and it basically makes sure that it's only accessible to your application based on vendor IDs and various other things.
For example, iOS, do you know where it's stored, what it's called?
We can have a look. iOS secure vault, I guess, maybe. I'm trying not to get applications that store API. Let's do that. Secure secrets in iOS app. I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head. There's Apple developer documentation all about security.
So if you're building a React Native app and you need to secure it for iOS, you would use native modules, not like...
I'm not 100% sure on this, but I'm pretty sure that React Native will abstract access to those, so you still get access to the underlying secure storage mechanisms. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the case. It's been a while since I've done React Native. Usually when it comes to writing something that requires very heightened levels of security around data storage, I would recommend going native, like absolute native. But I'm pretty sure React Native has APIs onto the Android and Apple versions of whatever this word is that doesn't come to my mind immediately. It might just be secure API. Does anybody here do iOS development and know the answer?
I'm an iOS developer, but I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head. But the thing is, I think it's something benign like secure vault, or like it's one of those things that's hard to Google. But the yeah, if you I mean, this is the security documentation for iOS. I'm pretty sure if you skim through that, you'll find it. But don't store things in something that could potentially be accessible via another application, which obviously when you're looking at web apps is not ideal. Yeah. Cool. All right. Thanks everyone. I promise to give you some time back. Let's go eat snacks and get drunk, or something. Thank you.